Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans, and we have someone extremely special and very humbling to have on because he runs an incredible uh, podcast, which is called the Mindset and Self Mastery Show, where let's be honest, we all have our crap that we deal with and really unpacking that. And what's so incredible is I literally just had a really cool conversation with this man and he said, hey, you know what, I don't want to talk about my coaching and how incredible my clients are and what I've been able to produce and the results. I really just want to talk about these tough things that we are all facing that nobody wants to talk about. And I thought that was really interesting because it was tremendously different than most of our guests. And so today you will want to listen to every part of this episode, and you want to listen to it. You want to make sure you share this with your friend. So he is the CEO and founder of this Mindset and Self Mastery. He is also the business coach of 3D printing, as well as, give me 1 second here, Media Lab. Let me do a little intro again for you. Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I am your host, Christian D. Evans, and we have someone special on today. We're going to be unpacking a lot of stories that he had to work through, but also the people that he was able to have. Runs an incredible podcast, which is called the Mindset and Self Mastery Show. And the really cool thing about him as a guest is most of our audience, most of our podcast guests, they talk about, how amazing they are and how ambitious and incredible results they've been able to produce for their clients. But he didn't want to talk about any of that. He really wanted to talk about and unpacking his story, but also my story, and then as well as his guest story about the crap that we don't want to talk about. But that's what is necessary to really enjoy the next part of our life. And I'm just very excited about it. Nick McGowan is our guest. Nick, if you would just kind of share our audience a little bit about you and your history, man.
Man, I appreciate that, Christian. And first off, thank you. Thank you for having the platform that you have, for inviting me onto the show, and for doing such a wonderful job that you do, man. I think the energy that you bring has been fantastic. So once I heard the first 2 minutes of the show, I was like, all right, I'm in. I think we'll have a great conversation. And as you pointed out in the beginning of this, we had a little bit of a conversation before we hit record. And yeah, I get it. Look, I'm a podcast host. So I know that a lot of people, when they go on podcasts, they want to talk about me, and all the things that I do. And realistically, none of that really fucking matters to people that don't know me or care what's going on. I think the biggest thing to understand, and I have to give some context to who I am, so people aren't just like, what the fuck's this guy talking about? Why is he here? But I think the biggest thing to understand is that there are a lot of things that we go through as people, men, women, doesn't matter the sex. Just we as people go through stuff. And we just keep compounding these problems and the traumas and don't actually do anything with it. So I'm the host of the Mindset and Self Mastery Show. I'm one of the leaders for the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood, which is a brotherhood specifically for men that want to be able to up-level their lives and change the way that they're doing things and really fight against mediocrity. Outside of that, I do coaching. I've worked with clients for years, which led me into the podcast. I kind of joked with you. I mean, I have so many great conversations with clients, and we're talking about deep, dark shit and helping them getting through stuff. And how do I go, oh, well, you told me that your uncle touched you when you were 7. I'm going to record this and share this out with the world. Are you all right with that? Fuck no. No one's going to be okay with that. But that all led to the podcast and being able to get into the conversations with people where we go, what was it like to be able to go through the deep, dark times where maybe you wanted to kill your entire family, but you didn't? How did you get through that? Because most people don't want to start a conversation, be like, hi, I'm Nick. I wanted everybody in my family to die, but I'm okay now. You'd be like, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? So realistically, I'm excited for us to get into the conversations, to be able to talk about the guests that I've had on the shows, because that's what it's all about. As you know, with the guests, there's so much good stuff that people get into and little nuggets of wisdom that I think people can take from this. So I really hope that we can unpack some of that. And I hope that your audience is able to go away with some sort of inspiration, some motivation, or at least some sort of clarification of what they want to do from here.
Well, one of the things that I think is really remarkable, because in your podcast side, your mission here on your website, nickmcgowan.com, it says, my mission and goal of the podcast is to improve people's lives and share the secret gems other people have discovered throughout life so you can achieve greatness without the trials and errors other people have gone through, right? Wisdom is self-mastery. It is to know oneself and to understand, hey, these are my weak spots, and how do I build systems and processes around those weak spots? And you've got an incredible guest, but I'd love to talk about just a few here. But
Mhm.
I want you to choose out of the guests that you've had, which one which one was the biggest story that really resonated with you the most?
It's interesting. So the podcast has been up and running for about 7 months at this point. There are 32 episodes that are scheduled. I think we have 50 that are recorded. Uh, and over the first handful of episodes, I'm reaching out to friends and family members and people that are warm. It's like any sort of business you're starting. You want to reach out to the people that you know at first. So it was interesting. The first couple of conversations that I had, the first one specifically was my cousin, who years and years and years ago, we talked about setting up a podcast. And life happened. I've heard from so many people that are like, I want to do a podcast, but blah blah blah, and whatever excuses. And then years later, they set it up. I was one of those guys as well. And my cousin Tom was literally just sending me texts of just the word podcast at one point. Like I would just get a text from him, literally just the word podcast. I'm like, Tom, stop. So years later, when I started the podcast, he was the first person to come on. And I'd learned something even within that first episode about my cousin's grandfather. Now he's cousin through family, through marriage, but not blood. So his grandfather is different than mine. But I learned a story that shaped his life within the first 15 minutes of having a conversation with somebody who I've known for my entire life. I'm older than him. So somebody I've known for his entire life. And being able to get into those simple things right up front, that to me, that first episode changed everything. Because once I heard that bit of a story that I had known from like, whisper down a lane sort of deal, but something that changed his life dramatically. That was one of those things that really set it up differently. And that gave me the energy to be able to go into the next handful of episodes. So Tom was one of them. But then the next two, literally, as I've gone through each and every one of these episodes, I've learned better of how to ask better questions, how to be able to guide the guests to be able to get to the direct answer that's deeper into their core. Because, some people will give you a surfacey answer. They're like, oh, yeah, businessy words and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, that's enough of that bullshit. We need to get deeper than that. I started to really be able to dig in. But my second guest was somebody that I was a business partner with years and years ago, and then went through addiction and recovery, fell back down to that hole and came back through in recovery again. So there were things that I learned even with that. Once I started to break out of my warm market and get into other guests and friends that would suggest people and different services that I got guests from and all of that, it's been wild to be able to get into conversations with these people where I often think with your mind's eye in a sense, walking down the street, maybe there's 15, 20 people that you pass. You have no idea what is behind those people's eyes. You have no idea what sort of story, what has shaped them. I mean, there could be somebody walking past you that's a monster and a serial killer. You have no idea. You could be walking past somebody who could be the next president of the country. You have no idea. And you have no idea what shaped them and what has built them. So to be able to get into these deep conversations, some of the patterns that I'm seeing is a lot of people kind of abandon themselves. And I was right there with them. I was married for about 8 years, went through a divorce about a year ago, and it took me maybe a year and a half to have the balls to be actually able to say, I don't think this is working. We need to do something different and make those changes. And as I started to process through my own stuff, I really understood I didn't have a husband. I had no idea. I was doing the best that I thought I could, but there were so many different ways that I was abandoning myself. I abandoned myself in my business and my marriage and my life and my hobbies and so many different things. And that all stems from fear. Most things come from fear. So having the conversations with the guests that I've had, some of the patterns that I've noticed is just that initial state of fear that people live in. And like you and I were talking before we hit record, typically that state of fear is, I got stuff I got to talk about, but I'm afraid to talk about it. And I don't really know how to talk about it. Because think about the stuff, Christian, specifically, when you walk into a room or you jump on a call with somebody, you just have this confidence to you because you know your stuff. Even if you don't really know what's going to happen, you're kind of playing jazz. You're like, that's fine. I know where my walls are and I can play within the walls. Some people don't know where their walls are, especially with tough, traumatic shit that happened when they were a little kid, or something that's happening to them now, or somebody that's fighting through a marriage and they don't know how to husband or be a father or a wife or whatever that looks like. So I think there's a lot of tough stuff that people go through that they're just really afraid to be able to open up. And part of the show is to be able to get people onto the platform to be able to open up. Now, I've had wonderful guests that easily open up about things. I've had a few where I've told them up front, like, yo, if you're getting real surfacey, I'm gonna pull your ass down. We're gonna get into the depths. And they're like, all right, okay, let's do this. And here I come, and I yank them down. But that's where the growth comes from. Because if you get somebody to the point where they're like, look, I'm hurting right now, and I don't really know how to talk about this. Sometimes it's just difficult for them to be able to process through. I mean, think about the guests that you have when you get into stuff. You can tell where people are like, I kind of know what I'm talking about. I kind of don't. I'm a little uncomfortable with this. But if you can get them to the point where they go, look, I'm uncomfortable, but I feel like there's trust here. I need to be able to work through this stuff. I think being vocal about that allows the people that are listening or watching these episodes behind their phone, behind their laptop, safe in their office or safe in their house. They don't have to talk to anybody yet, but at least they can hear and understand that you're not alone. And I mean, that might sound simple and also kind of stupid, but you're not. None of us are unique when it comes to that stuff. The amount of people I've talked to that they're, you just wouldn't expect that there's crazy stuff. And they go, oh yeah, I was molested as well. Oh yeah, I overdosed on heroin too. Or, oh yeah, I was doing lots of drugs. And oh yeah, I was homeless. Like, oh my God. But a lot of people want to look and go, oh, well, you're in a really bad spot. And now you're in a great spot. So let's talk about all your success. Fuck that success. That's fine. You're doing good things. That's cool. But what happened? What was the journey like? Full pun intended, I guess here. But what was that journey to be able to get you to the point where you go, oh my God, I understand this stuff now? Because think about it, man. Like the more you learn, I don't know if you and I are the same, but the more I learn, the more I understand. Oh my God, there's so much more shit for me to learn and for me to understand. And even if you're just a couple steps further than people, that's just a couple steps where you can reach your hand back and be able to help those people out. Do you find some of that with the guests that you have on or some of the clients that you work with?
Yeah, I do. One of the things that and I appreciate you sharing this, because one of the things I've discovered is I'm a big believer in order to achieve the highs of highs, you have to really experience the lows of lows, right? It's an equilibrium kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so with that being said, it's like, I always ask like what failures really helped you achieve that bigger thing. But really unpacking those deeper failures. And like you said, fear is an interesting thing because it could be beneficial, but it also could hold you back, right? And what I mean by this is that fear positively could be, hey, you know what? I'm going to pursue these. I'm going to risk this because I fear not being known more so than fear, oh gosh, what are people going to think about this, right? And there's that same kind of fear, but it's just positioned differently, right? Fear is still existent. So let me ask you this, because being able to ask those intentional questions and unpacking this, we hear a lot about authenticity. And as a leader and as an entrepreneur, as a business people, right, there has to be someone that's mature enough to be able to facilitate those questions in that ecosystem where, okay, there is trust built. And now you being able to share then allows, them to say, okay, I feel comfortable around this person. And then also what I've discovered is asking the right questions. You can't sometimes open up just like, hey, what are you struggling with, man? Naturally you got to ask better questions to get a better response. And so Nick, I love to get your perspective on, or maybe just some list of questions, or maybe some questions that you do ask to help you unpack that slowly but surely, but to be able to direct them in the right direction. Say, okay, this is where we're going, this is what's happening. Oh, I see what's happening here as someone looking into their story.
Yeah. Good question. So I think one of the things that I do often within my coaching is being able to teach people how to communicate. Because one of the big problems is just being able to communicate into your own head. Think about your stuff that you're talking about by yourself that you have a hard time getting out, and being able to actually pronunciate, this is what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to go through, etc. So one of the things that I did when I first started the podcast was I need to know all the questions. I'm kind of one of those big planners, like a visionary planner in a sense. I can see where the forests are, but I have no idea what the names of the trees are or what's going on each one of the trees, where some people just focus specifically on those trees. So I set up about 10, maybe 12 different questions that I was going to ask the first handful of episodes. I started to go through those questions. And then honestly, man, I noticed that the magic of the conversations was really coming from being able to ask questions that came up in the moment. And I think a lot of that really ties back into that art of communication, I've been in sales, I don't know, since I was a toddler. My mom used to say I could sell a ketchup popsicle to a lady in a white dress with gloves on. And I always thought that was so strange because I'm like, who the fuck is selling ketchup popsicles? Who even makes ketchup popsicles? And why is this lady in a white dress anywhere near me to buy one of these things? But she's right. I would have sold it to her. So going through and knowing what those questions are up front is kind of a thing like I'd mentioned a couple minutes ago, having that confidence to be able to get onto a call. I know what those borders are. But at this point, literally what I do is, let's say I've got 10 questions. 2 of them are going to be asked. The first one is kind of an anchor question that I ask in the beginning of my conversations. What do you do for a living? And what's one thing that most people don't know about you that's maybe odd or bizarre? Because honestly, that'll take us down some weird path. I had one guest on that was like, well, I've got a bull tattoo on my arm because I lost $50,000 in Spain. What? How am I supposed to talk about anything else on this podcast besides that thing? So that can typically take us on some path, which there was some deep wisdom that we got to from that. And then one of the things that I asked, the last question I ask on my show is something along the lines of give us some sort of advice for people that are on their path towards self-mastery, to be able to get that last little nugget of knowledge from people, the thing that they take with them at all times. But really the meat of the conversation in between those two, the other 40, 45 minutes, that's really flowing through and figuring out what are some of the things that have changed the way that you look at life, that have changed you. So something I'll give you that I really feel opens up a lot of great doors, or what moments in time, what episodes in time have been major pivot points that have changed your life drastically. Because typically people will have 1 to 3 or 4 different things in life that happened. When I was a little kid, this happened, or, you know, some family member died in front of me or something like that, that changed things, the way that they looked at everything. And then being able to figure out from there, what are you doing with that knowledge now? So if you take one little bit and go, all right, well, what have you learned from this thing? Now let's jump 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years in the future where you're at now and go, well, what are you learning right now? Rethinking about that. And then going into the deeper version of it and saying, well, what can you actually give to somebody outside of yourself? That's that bit of knowledge that you can take from that. Because think about it, then at that point, you have to ingest it again. You have to reprocess it and be able to give it out to somebody else. And you and I both know that when you're teaching other people, we also learn from that sort of stuff because it's coming back out from us. So I've had other people talk to me about the stuff that they've gone through, and I can see it in their eyes where they're like, oh yeah, I forgot about the depth in this, or the wisdom that I could have gotten from that. So I think realistically, and to some of your audience that maybe wants to set up their own podcast, or somebody that's in sales, or just wants to be a better communicator and leader, you got to listen first. And you got to listen for those little cues to be able to figure out, where can you take somebody? In my perspective, and in my medium, having conversations, we're trying to get to the core of a problem, to then be able to pull out the bits and pieces that we can put together in a process to be able to help other people kind of take those away and say, all right, well, I have this problem. I can use this little bit of a process and I can do this sort of stuff. But the communicator in us needs to be able to ask those questions to be able to figure out, how do we get to the depths of that, but understanding what your end goal is. So I know I'm giving a lot and kind of spinning it all here, but understanding what that end goal is. What do you want? I know from my show, I want to be able to figure out what happened to you in the course of life that has created you into who you are now. But I want to talk to you back then when you were going to kill everybody, or yourself, or you had no idea how you're going to get out of this. But honestly, man, I think some of that also has to come from experience. If I had no experience, I was just asking people questions, the fuck is that? That's not going to do anything. But I've been there. I overdosed on heroin. I've been divorced. I've been homeless. I've had a couple companies that were great, and then they weren't. And then, you know, different things that have happened over the course of time to be able to figure out, like, I had to work through my own stuff and get to the point where I could also talk to people, to then be able to talk to other people. And I think that's another pattern that I've seen with a lot of the guests, where they do these guests, they're a guest on a podcast, or they do an interview or whatever. Yeah, on one hand, to be able to talk about themselves or their business, etc. But I hope that within our conversation, they're able to learn something within it, where it's not as much about the audience. It's always an audience of one in my eyes. Some people take that as a religious-y sort of thing. I look at it in a sense of, there's somebody that's going to listen to this show that goes, oh my God, that's me. going through that shit right now. How do I get through it? And especially if it's that person that's the guest, if they go, well, yeah, I went through that stuff and, I thought I'd processed through a lot of it, but I guess I wasn't finished. There are conversations that I have at the end of the show after we stop recording where they're like, man, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, kind of sucked that we got into that little thing, but I'm glad that I was able to revisit that. Thank you. That in and of itself is huge. But back to what you said, you got to be able to ask the right questions to be able to get there. You got to listen for cues to be able to understand what the right questions are and know what your end goal is. My goal is to be able to pull out the right information and be able to get them to the depths. And I can smell when people are giving me bullshit or not,
Well, it's interesting because I had someone on earlier this week, and he was talking about facades, and obviously we all have a facade on definitely when we first meet because we have these projections that we want to push on, and then the way to do that, like you mentioned, is to facilitate the right questions, and that's why I really appreciate you diving deep in that, unpacking that, because it's not just these just generic questions.
Yeah.
It is very intentional, developed questions that help you say, okay, you know what, that's a good point. Thanks so much for bringing that up, Nick. Let me think about that. And if they're really thinking about it, then that you really can tell that they really want to unpack that. Listening to a lot of different coaches and consultants and counselors as well, having those conversations, asking questions, because then they come to that same that own conclusion. And let me ask you this, because you've had some interesting people on your podcast, which is really awesome. But when they're talking about that one question, like let's say, for example, what are some pivotal points in their life that really allowed them to change perspective or change trajectory or something like that, and specifically in reference to healing processes, because some people, what I've noticed is it takes them a while to acknowledge it themselves, take ownership that, okay, this happened to me. And then what happens then is it even takes them a little longer to actually say, hey, I feel comfortable enough in my own skin to be able to share it with others. And
Yeah.
that's when you're really able to take full that it does not have power over you anymore, and you have
Yeah.
power over it. And I know we're kind of getting into a little bit more weeds, but I love for you to just kind of unpack this, because I love for you to walk through that healing process. And I know everybody's timeline is different, so it's not a matter of how to do it quicker. It's more of just like, hey, what are those proper steps that you've identified from talking to so many people on your podcast?
Man, what a great observation. Uh, it's tough, I think, for people to be able to see that and feel that if they don't know that it's a thing. You and I can look at that, and I can think specifically back to different times where I go, well, this thing happened, and then I didn't know how to handle it. And then it took a year, and then it came back up again and still didn't really know how to handle it. But I thought I did some work. And then it took 6 months or another year or 2 years or whatever. And then you've got to be able to get to the point where you go, all right, I need to deal with this problem right now. I think about it this way. And somebody said this years ago, you can make as many excuses as you want, but if something's not a priority and it's not a must, it's just not going to happen. Like if you have kids and your kid breaks their arm, you're not going to be like, yeah, it's all right. It'll heal. It's going to be okay. If the school calls you and goes, your kid has a broken arm, its arm is hanging and just dangling here, you're going to drop everything and go run to go pick up your kid and take care of them. A lot of people forget about themselves in that traumatic childhood experience that they had to deal with or didn't fully process through. And that child is inside with a broken arm, just dangling like, fuck, can you come fix my arm for me? And you're like, it's all right, kid, you'll be okay. You've been suffering for 20 years now, so whatever. So I have noticed that pattern with people on the show. In fact, a lot of the guests that I have gone through those different phases. I think there's that first phase of being aware of it. And then that second phase of taking some sort of inventory, but people typically get stuck there where they go, all right, I'm kind of aware of this thing. All right, let me dive into this a little bit. And they don't know what to do. And they're not sure what to process, how to process. And they get lost in those weeds, or they just say, screw it, I'm done because I want to go do something else. And then it doesn't actually get fixed until the problem is a big, hairy, scary monster in front of them and they have to fix it. I went through a couple of experiences where honestly, I was suicidal about 6-7 years ago because I'd built a company. We'd built a very successful company, social media, digital marketing agency, and we were all about small business, like doing it for the small guy in a sense. But damn, things were so tight because the small guy is typically broke. Our hearts were in it. Their hearts were somewhat in it, but their dollars weren't. And we built a sizable company with my ex-in-laws at the point, and started to actually step outside of what we had, started to bring in new services, new offerings, blah, blah, blah. We were growing the company. Long story short, I'd built this 40-foot cage all around me called my company, and I had no idea how to get out of it. And I knew it was coming. I had no idea how to deal with it. And it was like one of those, yeah, I'll let future Nick deal with that problem. Future Nick hated past Nick at that point because he was like, you're an asshole, because now I have to deal with this and I have no idea how to deal with this thing. So being stuck in a 40-foot cage, not knowing how to get out, yet looking out of my condo in downtown Portland, Oregon, overlooking a beautiful park and feeling like I'm on top of the world, but living in hell. It was crazy. So I thought, honestly, the best way to get out of this is to just jump off the top of my condo building. And at that point where you're like, you know what, I'm either going to jump or I'm not, stop. You've got to be able to understand what your fucking triggers are and what's happening. And there was a moment where I felt blissful, that suicidal bliss where you're like, everything's going to be all right. I'm just going to do this and jump off, and that's it. That was just one of those moments. But I remember being able to change that back and going, I need to stop this. I have no idea how to get out of this. I have no idea how to get around the cage, outside of the cage, no idea what to do. It ended up taking me moving cross country, dissolving my partnership, and taking a 3-month sabbatical. To some people, that might sound crazy for them to be able to move cross country, get out of their own company, and take some time off. But look, it was necessary to be able to do those things. And within those moments, I had to be able to figure out what's actually going on here. So that big, hairy, scary monster was literally standing in my apartment, looking at me for 2 months, going, all right, dude, well, now what? You didn't jump off the roof, and now you left your business. What happens next? What are you doing from here? And the bullshit that'll come into your mind and the negative feedback and all of that. So I bring that up because I know that there are other people that go through stuff and they don't know how to be able to get around it. And that's okay. You don't have to know all the things. You just need to be able to do the things right now. And there are still times, man, where every day there are things that happen and my brain starts to run 100,000 miles ahead, just starts to move. And I think of all this stuff. And I've been told by different people that I run circles around some of the people I work with because of the way that I think about things. I don't want to be that guy that runs circles. I want to be the guy that has the team that we're all running circles or doing something together. But there are times where I'm so much further ahead because I don't want to deal with the stuff that I've got in front of me right now. And it's easier to think about that stuff. But again, back to the awareness. When you're aware of that, you go, hold up, what's actually going on? You're able to pull yourself back. So something I want to be able to give to the audience that I give to my clients and I even give to the podcast guests is being able to understand what your actual trigger is and what sets you off a little differently outside of your norm. For me, honestly, dude, this is kind of my natural state. I'm excited. I'm joyous, typically joking, and I got a mouth like a sailor, as you can kind of tell. So if some of that stuff isn't happening throughout the day, it might take me a half hour. It might take me 2 hours. It might take me the entire fucking day to be able to understand that I've been out of whack. But when I'm aware of that, I go, well, what is it? I can then get back to it and start to ask the questions to myself and say, well, why are you out of whack? What's happening right now? What set you off that course? What's really the bullshit problem that you think's there that's probably not there? You go, well, it's not really a problem. I'm just thinking about stuff that's in the future and I'm not being present. Oh, okay, cool. And you kind of pull your energy back. I think of like an X-Men character, just pull it right back to you, do a couple breaths in and out and go, well, all right, rock and roll. Let's just keep moving along. And sometimes it's just a matter of taking it day by day by day. But when you're in the bullshit and you're going through stuff that's just tough, or something's in the back of your mind just eating at you because it's just trauma back there, it's hard to stop in the middle of the day and go, all right, well, I got to deal with this trauma right now. But if you take it bit by bit by bit, you can start taking little chunks out of it and start to figure out what this looks like. I think a lot of the people I've coached and even guests that have been on the show, one of the biggest Achilles heel that a lot of people have, there's this bullshit that they come up with, is that they have to get everything done all in one day or in this shortened timeline. I have to fix all of my problems within this sort of space, and then I'll be able to do this. How does that make any sense? Yet we all do it, where we're like, all right, fine, I'm just going to do this thing. I'm going to fix this fucking problem. Then I'm going to go off and do other great things. But you don't fix the problem. So you can't do any of that other stuff. But if you keep working just bit by bit by bit and understand what is triggering you, and then go, all right, well, I need to work on this a little bit at a time. And then you could set it to the side and come back to it. It doesn't all have to be done at one point. But look, it's just got to be done. And I think that boils down to people being responsible for themselves. If you're not responsible for yourself and you're going, well, somebody else did this to me, victimhood ain't going to get anywhere. But if you look at it and go, look, I know that I can do things, and these other people and these other things that are outside of me, they're outside of me. So what can I do right now? What can I do today? Like, I've got two little notes that are around my office. One is, what are you waiting for? And the other is, what can you do today? And both of those almost feel like they're at either sides, but they're so close to like almost a Venn diagram where they're almost right there with each other. What are you waiting for? And what can you do today? That's not saying, well, what's coming up in 10 years? What's your 15-year plan? Fuck, I don't know. I'm trying to figure this out day by day by day, understanding what the bigger chunks of things that I want to do. And we can go further down the weeds with that, but I think I'll pull back a little bit.
No, I mean, you just brought some amazing insight there. And, one of the things that as you were talking, that I found so interesting is just like you were saying, it's like you identify your behavior, your patterns, your habits. And then when you start doing that, then you start realizing, okay, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Right? Asking that question. Okay. Well, then how do I prevent myself? Because once you understand the why, then you say, okay, well, I do X, Y, Z, and then that's why I'm in this state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or that's why I'm angry. That's why I'm upset. So then you say, okay, well, what can I do to prevent that thing from happening? And then if it does happen, how can I get myself out of that state faster, right? Because sometimes if you're learning these habits and systems, it may take you 2 days, right? Okay, finally, I'm getting out of my state. I talked to my ex-boyfriend. I'm so mad now, blah, 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 whatever. And then all of a sudden I have to flow back in and everybody calm down, whatever. And then I get back to stable normalcy. And so you mentioned something, Nick, that I want to kind of ask you again. You said you take a few deep breaths when you're in that state and you're thinking far in advance. Okay, you realize, okay, this is what's happening. So then you say, okay, I'm going to take a few deep breaths. What else do you do in that when you're in that state to remove yourself from that state?
Physically move. Physically get out of whatever space that I'm in. There are times where you can see I'm standing in my office. I've got a sit-stand desk. So there's some times where I'll just put the desk down and I'll sit down and be able to wheel myself back and literally move away. There are other times where I'll leave my house. I'll go walk down the street. I'll go walk around. I'll go grab mail. I'll go sit on the back porch. I'll go turn on metal music and just have it blaring for a couple minutes. Change your state. So being able to actually get out of that physical state, because people will just get so angry and they're like, oh my God, I'm just so fucking pissed off right now. It's like, well, just move, stop, get out of that spot and go walk somewhere else and be able to actually get out of that. So if you think being able to pull your energy back, I look at that because when those other things are pulling my energy away, no, this is mine. Give me my energy back. I want to take my energy back. The breathing helps me to just focus on something. It's not even it's not like a big, hippy dippy sort of thing of like, it's all about the breath, because we can get into that because breath is an important thing, but that little bit of focus to just count 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3. So something so stupidly simple as that, just to stop you from focusing anywhere else and just to be right here. So if you can breathe and take a step away and just go walk away for a minute, beautiful. I think of taking a quick beat. I'm a musician. So just that one little rest or that one little beat that you can just skip and just hold up, where I think a lot of people get themselves in trouble. And I've done this before, man, I did this for a long time, where the brain would think things and just throw it like a missile out of my mouth. And I'm trying to grab it. I'm like, no, come back. I don't want you to get out of my face yet, and just like throwing these things out. But to take that one beat, take that breath. All right, well, what's really happening here? Oh, I'm still a little pissed. All right, I'm going to go walk away for a second and then be able to come back and go, all right, I'm good. Back to being a musician. I think of like having fresh ears. It's to your audience that are musicians. Think about how many times you've been working on a song, you've been working with people and you're just killing this thing. And you're just like, I don't know what the next part's supposed to be or what we're supposed to do here. This is stupid. And you just keep fighting it and fighting it and fighting it. people will do the same thing with themselves. But once you walk away and come back, and you come back with fresh ears or fresh eyes, you go, oh man, I hear this differently. Same deal with a problem. You look at it and go, oh, I see this differently. If you see that you're getting to a point where you're frustrated, understand why you're frustrated. Sometimes it's almost that little bit of a breakthrough where, yeah, you kind of need to push through. Other times you're just beating the hell out of yourself for no good. And no, I don't know, some people are sadists, but at the same time, like you can calm down a little bit. Like no need to kick your own ass for no good reason. If you're just beating yourself up, and it's not actually like, it's not a workout in a sense that it's not actually helping you, it's just harming you. So again, if you think about pulling your energy back, stepping outside of the space that you're in, taking that quick moment and going, well, what's really going on here? From the present standpoint, it can be so easy to think from the past standpoint and go, oh, this person pissed me off because, last week they did this, or you remember 7 years ago, honey, when you said this thing or whatever. And not living in that space, but living in the moment now and going, all right, well, what's actually happening now? This might sound stupid, but some people have gotten us. But Christian, do you remember the movie Memento from the early 2000s?
Sadly, I do not.
All good. It was one of those, like, I think it was like a B movie in a sense. This guy had basically like a goldfish brain. So something happened. I forget most of the movie, but something happened and he could only remember bits and pieces. But there was a scene within the movie where he was running and he's like, all right, so what's going on? And he saw somebody else and he's like, oh shit, I'm running after that guy. And the guy sees him and has a gun and starts to look at him. And he's like, no, he's running after me. And it was that split moment where he had no idea what was going on, but was trying to take in what's happening. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm running. Why am I running? I guess I'm running after him. He's got a fucking gun. He's pointing at me. I guess he's running after me. All right. And just, he's able to shift and go a different direction. That's very logical in that sort of sense, where we can be super and hyper emotional, where we go, well, I'm running, but I don't want to run. My legs really hurt. That doesn't matter. Like, what does that matter here? Or I don't want to have these conversations. And being able to understand that those things are just triggers. Those are just warnings. And sometimes it's a matter of, the warning is there because you're about to do something that's awesome, or you're about to do something that's terrible, but you can feel that. And I think a lot of people don't trust their intuition, don't know how to be able to actually get to the point where they can listen to it. So I know I'm giving layers upon layers upon layers here, but realistically, in a very black and white sense, look, if you can pull your energy back and understand that this is my energy, just breathe. Just the 3 count in, 3 count out, 4 count, 5 count, whatever you want to count to, just breathe. Just focus on breathing for a minute and then asking yourself, what's actually happening here? What can I do today? And what are you waiting for?
I love that. I love that insight. And one of the things I just want to kind of footstep as well is just having the right expectation. So if it keeps happening and you're in that situation, don't get mad and frustrated because it's a circular situation and you just get even worse. And it's just like, hey, give yourself some grace. Hey, you know what? Just create those boundaries a little bit thicker. Make sure you breathe, do those techniques, and then say, hey, you know what? I collapsed the time frame. So instead of taking 15 hours to overcome that situation, I took now 13 hours or whatever it may be. And so again, it's that consistent 1% progress in the right direction. Now, I do want to talk about something here on one of your podcast episodes, episode 23 here. It says the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood. The reason why I want to bring this up is because you have that amazing brotherhood ecosystem that you've been able to develop. And, evidently, Steve is the founder of the Mini Club and the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood. His background, what he believes make a powerhouse man. If you could kind of help me understand what the powerhouse man is in today's culture.
Sure. So simply put, a powerhouse man lives with virtue and does good work. And at the core, we're looking at character, we're looking at courage, and we're looking at commitment. If you take those 3 pillars, and honestly, any man or woman, if somebody is courageous, they have an in-depth character, and they're committed to what they're doing, you can change your life drastically. A lot of people just aren't. They don't know what their character needs to be. Their character, in a sense, is typically the character or the role that they play, where they go, well, I'm dad, or I'm husband, or I'm business leader, or I'm this, or I'm that. That's a character like in a TV show. That's not your actual character. If you think of who you are at your core, are you a liar? Because that's character. If you're somebody that's, in the business world and you're perpetually lying to people, your character isn't CEO, it's asshole. It's, it's somebody who's just lying to people. And having that commitment to continuing to look at doing great things. Like I was saying a little earlier, it can be so easy to kind of focus on, I need to do all these great things. I need to change the world. I need to do blah, 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 blah. Yeah, sure. But you really don't. You really need to actually work on what's happening in front of you right now. Like my focus right now has to be on us, has to be on you and I having this conversation, because that's what's going on right now. Not the 5 other meetings, not the other scheduled calls, not the other stuff that's going on, all of that. It's the focus where you're at right now. And that's part of character. That's part of your commitment. That's part of being courageous. So at the core of what we do in the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood is we help men really fight mediocrity, get away from mediocrity, and up level their lives. It's funny. I've got to point this out. So you'd said Steve runs a manly club. That's a Facebook group that we have. I think there's 13 or 14,000 men in the manly club on Facebook. In the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood, we started that a couple of months ago. So we're growing that. I think we're right around 100 men that are in the group. And of course, at that point, you get 100. You don't have all of those people hyper engaged, but the men that are engaged are the ones that are actually changing their lives. And it's funny because I asked the same question in both groups, just at different times. And one, the question in the group was, how often are you wearing a mask? And why are you wearing a mask? The manly club people were like, why wear a mask? Because I work on a construction site. Like, awesome. All right, cool. Understood. Thanks. And the other guys in the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood, they totally got it. They were like, I do my best to not wear a mask, but there are times where I feel I have to, or blah, blah, blah. So just thinking of that, like even when you talk to people, and the reason why I'm bringing that up is when you talk to other people outside of yourself, you can tell when you can get into a deeper conversation with them. And you can tell if you have the ability to be able to have deeper conversation. One of the things I want to bring up that I think we've kind of skirted around a little bit. Look, there's so much stuff that we as people, you can fix your own problems. You can deal with your own stuff. You can rely on other people to be kind of a bouncer off, in a sense, where you can toss different ideas to them. They can bounce things back to you. They can listen, etc. But I think one of the things we need to understand is how you were raised. Because when you were a little kid, that set the trajectory to where you are today, no matter what you think. If you were raised in a household or situations where they didn't allow you to actually go through your emotions and talk through and process through things, then you're probably not doing it right now unless you've been through some deep shit and you've really worked at it. I've been through some deep shit. I've worked at it, and God, I've probably spent a couple $100,000 on different courses and coaches and seminars and things over the course of the past 20 years trying to fix me, when realistically it's me understanding what happened, working through that and processing through that. So no matter what we're saying here, audience, no matter what sort of tips, tricks, little guidelines and all of that, you need to go back through the stuff that happened when you were younger to understand who you are today. Because if you start dealing with shit and working on the stuff that you have going on right now, you're just simply dealing with symptoms. You're not working on the actual problem or the root of it. And it's think about cancer in a sense. You're not just going to deal with the symptoms. You actually want to get the cancer out of there. And too many people deal with the symptoms because they get stuck. They just get stuck in being a husband or a father or a business owner. And they're like, oh, I'm just doing all these things. You got to make some time to be able to work through that. Again, not everything has to happen all right now, but do some of the work and be able to be mindful of those triggers that come up where you go, I'm not feeling right now. Why is that? But if you get back and you figure out what happened when you were younger, sit down with that little kid and go, hey, this is tough right now, but I got you. We're good. We're going to get through this. You can heal that trauma and those symptoms will start to go away.
I love what you're saying here, and I want to bring something up here because I'm a big believer that I don't think people can really, and I've asked this question before, and after asking it and analyzing it myself, I really don't think people can get to the maximum optimized personal person that they wanted, that they desire in the future, without someone assistance or a community of some sort, right? Because what happens is other people see behaviors and see red flags that you are not able to see yourself. And secondly, as well as just like you were talking about, when other people open up and share that they're also doing that same journey, that life, then what happens is it allows us to say, oh wow, what did you do to prevent yourself from doing that? Now, I also am a big believer that sometimes there's two different people. One that's proactive, where, okay, hey, I'm realizing that these are really bad behaviors. I should be aware of this, okay? Before they all of a sudden end up jail, and then it's like, hey, now I'm in 50 years, and now I have to figure these problems and issues out, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, the other person is that one where it's life slapped you upside the head, and now you are facing some real situation. It's like, okay, there's obviously life is giving you some sort of red flags. To me, from a biblical, I think God puts certain things that say, "Hey, alarm flags, a little bit
Agreed.
alerts, real." And then obviously, if you do not acknowledge it, now I think, like I mentioned, you have to have a third party. But also, I don't think a lot of people are really that stupid. They see it, they get it, but they just don't want to deal with it
Yeah.
because of insecurity, of fear, of what's going to be unpacked and stuff like that. So I know there was just a lot thrown out at you, and I just kind of want you to just go with it where you want to.
Well, totally, man. I appreciate you bringing it back to what the original question was, because my ADD kind of spun it on a little loop here. That's the whole point to the group, to the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood. If you think of what a brotherhood or any sort of community, it's accountability, it's love, and it's to be able to help each other grow. So I see stuff, and I pointed out about the Manly Club, the difference between the Manly Club and the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood. It's really anything you see that's kind of surface level and then in deep. And if you think of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, 20% of those people are the ones that are in the Powerhouse Men Brotherhood, because those are the ones that get it. Those are the ones that are working through things. Those are also the ones that you can basically put your back up against with them and climb up walls, because you've got accountability and you've got that other leadership from somebody that you can count on. So I'm right there with you. I agree that we are not supposed to do life alone. That might be the Christian side of me that comes out that thinks about that, but it might also just be part of our human nature where we shouldn't do this thing all by ourselves. And look, I'll call it out, because I think we've all been there where you're like, I don't want to talk to anybody about anything. I want everybody to leave me alone and just go away. And yeah, there are times where you need to recharge, but typically if those things are coming up, there's something there. There's a reason for that. And what I found is that typically that reason is a good reason. You're just trying to put a Band-Aid over it, because that good reason is to help you be able to grow and learn. And if you're in a community or in a space where you have that accountability, you have to show up. You also have those brothers that are there to be able to help you out and also be able to understand if you're a little off. So within the brotherhood, we have certain people that, let's say brand new people that come in. You don't know anything about them until you know something about them. But then there are others that have been in for the past couple of months where I can kind of tell there's something a little off. And if you have that trust with somebody else where you can message them and go, hey man, you came to mind a couple of times. How are you doing? You might be able to get that person to go, hey, I'm in a rough spot right now. Here's what's happening. Or I'm totally good. I've been a little off because of this. So I think, again, that community really helps you to have that accountability and help you to grow. But you've got to be the right person in the time to be able to do that. I see different people try to get involved with things that they want to get involved for kind of the wrong reasons. I'm going to throw people onto the bus here, but you think about the people that just try to go out and coach and do whatever. They're just pushing shit. That's what they're doing. They're just pushing shit and trying to just look at people as dollar signs. I don't get that. I used to do that a lot in previous businesses because I was broke growing up. I lived in a sort of a rich dad, poor dad situation. But it was really rich dad, poor mom sort of situation. So I saw what it was like to have a lot of money. I saw what it was like to be completely broke, and then just started looking at people of how do I make money off them? And that doesn't actually help you at all. And if you create a community or you become part of a community and you're just open and vulnerable about the stuff that you're going through, you never know who else is going to listen to that and open up as well. Somebody else might listen to it and go, that sucks for them. Might not open up for them, but it's going to help you. So I think the community, if you can find a good community, you find one that can actually help you. And it doesn't matter what that is. It could be a church. It could be, a little small group within the company you work with. It could be a couple other people, but I think it takes people actually looking for those things to be able to understand that, hey, there's more that can be done, but I can't do it all on my own. But I do want to toss this out there that you, audience, whoever's listening right now, you do need to take that first step. And sometimes some of the first steps are just you understanding what's happening in your own head to then be able to start to talk about it. But hey, you're totally fine. If you get to the point where you're like, I've got you in front of me, I don't know what's going on, but I'm off, help. That's fine. That's totally good enough, because then that's that first step to be able to start moving along. But if you just hide and you continue to just hermit up in your house, I mean, what do you want us to do? You can't do anything at that point.
Wow, man, this has just been such an authentic and true conversation, Nick. And I just appreciate your immense wisdom and value and what you're doing with men, but also just that exponential aspect. When you help and impact that one man, it helps that woman, and that woman obviously as well. And it's just impacting just people in general. And I just, Nick, I appreciate the time that we were able to unpack just talking about like the psychology of things and the right questions to ask. And, for those listeners that are realizing, okay, you know what, there are some alerts, red flags that are kind of coming up, and I need someone to dive deep into it. And you're looking for a community that's like, okay, hey, I want to dive deep into things, right? And I don't want to just be basic. And I know that I need that. Nick, how can our audience reach out to you, be part of what you got going in your community, man?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Again, thank you so much for having me on the show. Christian, I'd love to have you on my show at some point too. And that show is the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. You can go to the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show.com, or just go to YouTube and type in the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. Information will pop up. You'll see all the episodes, all the clips, and all of that. So again, for the third plug, the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show.com, as well as the Brotherhood. Check out Powerhouse Men Brotherhood. And it's powerhousemen.com, and that'll give you all the information. Again, Christian, man, I appreciate you having me on. This has been a wonderful conversation, and just keep doing awesome work, brother.
Thanks, bud. And guys, those links will be in the description below. So make sure you stop what you're doing. And deep down in your heart, it doesn't matter where you're at in income level, doesn't matter if you got momentum, whatever, you just feel like something's off. Something's not just, it just feels like something I need to develop and unpack something. Reach out to Nick and his community, because they definitely can just work with you and just build that amazing community, work with you. And like you said, if you're thinking, hey, this is only me, I'm the only one that's dealt with this, guess what? You're wrong. And other people have worked through this same situation, whatever it may be. So those links will be in the description. And Nick, again, I appreciate your immense value that you brought today. I always love to ask my guests before we let you go, is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
You're not unique, but you need to talk about what you're going through.
Amen. Amen. There you go. That is my friend, the one and only Nick McGowan. That is the podcast host, the Mindset and Self-Mastery Show. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can.